Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Matthew Phillion.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm a little scratchy, but other than that, I'm doing great.
I'm so excited to have you on. I can't wait to chat all about your book and audiobook and everything. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell me about your writing?
So I am the author of it's technically YA superhero. I always say I wrote it to entertain myself, and it became YA. So you make of that what you will. But I've been a writer my entire career, and after being a screenwriter and being part of these big productions where a lot of people are counting on you, I said, okay, I'm going to write something where if it doesn't sell, I'll be the only one who's disappointed. That's how I got into writing novels. And of course, the book was the one that actually found an audience. So I wrote this big, in going from writing romantic comedies, I'm like, what's the opposite of a romantic comedy? But a superhero novel. And then it found an audience sort of by accident. And one book became 5 books, and then it became a spinoff, and then a spinoff of the spinoff. And I just wrote a prequel last year of one of the older characters in the series. So it's been, it's kind of a dream come true because I grew up as a comic book nerd. So getting to write superhero stories professionally and have people actually like cosplay the characters and stuff has been wild. It's amazing.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. Yeah. Can you share a little bit more about the decision to make it superhero focused and how you kind of started creating that world?
It's almost going back to where I started, because as a kid I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I'm not. I am a mediocre. I can draw a little bit, but I'm never going to be a professional artist in that capacity. So I wanted to tell a comic book story that I could tell myself and not have to like it goes back to that, like, let me be the only one who's disappointed if nobody reads it. So I'll tell a story from a novel perspective. I majored in English writing. I'm an ex-journalist. I'm an ex-healthcare writer. So like wordplay is my thing. So I just leaned in on how do I make a story that feels like a comic book, but in prose. And these are all characters that I'd actually there were a whole bunch of characters that I'd had concepts for years.
Mm.
And when I was trying to figure out, I'm going to write a superhero book. Which one should I write? And I'm like, what if I just kind of throw them all together and see which ones have chemistry? And that's what happened. I had the 5 main characters in the Indestructibles. And what's funny, the spinoff Echo in the Sea actually has a bunch of the ones that didn't make it into the original series.
Oh, cool.
So, it's like, oh, I'll save that guy for later. And they kind of popped up in other books. When the villains and stuff that come up later on in the series, those were all characters that I had developed over the years that didn't necessarily belong in this series. It's always been kind of like a chemistry experiment of which ones feel right together. And I ended up with sort of like one of the first reviews that I ever got called it the Justice League meets the Breakfast Club. And I'm like, I'm stealing that. I'm going to put that on the cover of the book. That's fantastic.
That is an incredible review. Yeah.
And it really is just kind of it's more about their relationships with each other, and then having, the character style is none of them have a self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
So the drama comes from less is like the sort of the stereotypical drama. It's more like, oh, these are people that actually will do anything to help other people, no matter how much harm comes to themselves. So that's where I kind of built the story and the drama, is that that literally not a single hero in these books has a sense of self-preservation. It's all about kind of doing the right thing, no matter how bad that right thing might be for themselves.
Interesting.
And that's kind of the core concept of it.
So I'm curious, did it start for you, like this whole writing process, did it start with these are their powers, this is what each one does, or did you kind of tailor that to the themes at hand?
It actually kind of started off as so a lot of them are homages. Like if you look at there's a solar powered girl, so of course that's pretty easy to figure out what hero inspired that. There's a character that it's a ballet dancer. Batman is how I've referred to her, and that came from growing up around a lot of I knew a lot of ballet dancers who would perform through injuries that were like they would have put a football player out of commission, and they're dancing on 4 broken toes. I'm like, what happens if that person's a superhero? What happens if that person uses that low? So I would take these kind of concepts and come up with the personality around the character. I didn't know what they were going to do together. That was actually the hardest part, was figuring out why are they all in the room together at the same time. And it sort of became that classic origin story of like, and I'm a little bit older, and I'm starting to feel one of your generation starts to give up. Like, well, we tried to change the world and we didn't. So the whole concept was, okay, what if the last generation of superheroes didn't die in saving the world? They just got tired and couldn't do it. And what happens if someone brings this new group together and says, okay, now it's your turn to try to do some good in the world? So I had all of these like dream characters. I want to write ballerina Batman. I want to write the solar powered girl. I had this character Entropy Emily. um it's the whole concept note was she makes things weird. Like that was
Love it.
the world is weird around her. She has weird gravitational powers. The pitch was that she's got a black hole where her heart should be. It's just this weird gravitational anomaly. And like, where does this character fit in the world? And what if she's the one who takes her powers the least seriously, even though she could knock the entire planet off of its axis? And I'd always wanted to write a werewolf story, and that's a lot of any superhero that kind of loses their powers, loses control when they have their powers, is almost a werewolf story in a way. Like
Mhm.
Incredible Hulk is kind of a werewolf story, or a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story. So like, okay, that's the best part about superheroes. You can throw anything. It's the kitchen sink concept. You can have an alien next to a werewolf, next to um, an, a genius alchemist or something like that, and it all makes sense.
It's one
Um,
of my favorite things in superhero stories when like classic monster canon gets involved. So I'm so down for the werewolf superhero. That sounds fantastic.
I'm not supposed to play favorites, but it's one of those like, I really do love writing my little, and he's a werewolf with anxiety. So that's like part of the whole.
I would have anxiety if I was a werewolf. Absolutely. Relatable.
It really, if you have no idea what your next move is going to be, you probably would. I would live in a state of anxiety if I was a werewolf.
Mhm.
And so, mixing a little bit of the very weird sort of experimental characters that comic books can have versus the very classic, because it's a genre that's really good at kind of retreading old ground in new ways. We've got, and these are just a stockpile of ideas. I'm like, is the kid that has an alien in his brain that gives him powers going to make it into the book? Let's try him for a little while and see if he gets along and see what that voice is. And once they were all on the page kind of interacting and bickering like they do, I'm like, okay, I get my group. There's a couple that didn't make it in because there's only so much time and only so much space. So you don't want to steal focus from other characters.
Mhm.
And then it was just, let me find a problem for them to solve, and give them a reason to save the day, because otherwise they're just going to be, otherwise they will just be kind of hanging around the classroom bickering, uh, uh, um, Breakfast Club style. So
When you're writing, do you write linearly or do you kind of go out of order?
I am so linear. Look, oh my god, we just
It's
infected each other with it. I am so linear. I actually can't write out of order. I throw myself off by write out of order. I always know where the ending, though. That's my thing, is I always write to an ending, and that's my reward. I don't get to write the ending till I get there, and that motivates me to get to the end of the book. So I always know, and that's why the middle's the hardest part. Kicking things off is always fun, like, oh, it's a blank page, this is exciting, and knowing where I want them to get to is my reward. And then the middle is the part where you're pushing a ship over a mountain. That's the scary part, but that's my Christmas morning is when I get to actually, because I always know where they're going to end up. I always know the epilogue and what I'm aiming them at, and then I leave a lot of leeway in between for things to get. Uh, I leave room for the characters to surprise me and for the story to surprise me, and for me to be like, oh, that was a bad plan, Matthew. You should really not do that. Let's pull that scene out and throw it away. But I write in order. And I usually have, oh, it's on the floor now, so I can't show you. But I have just a board with sticky notes. And then when a scene is done, I pull the sticky note off and I throw it over my shoulder. I'm like, get that out of the way. But that also lets me continue to write linearly. If I need to move a scene up, I can take one that I have, because I do plan it out. I'm definitely a plotter versus a pantser.
okay.
So I'll plan everything out with just a couple sentences, like, you know, big werewolf fight scene, or enemy monologue, and I'll just have kind of like that sort of structure, and then I'll write to that order, and then I can move things around if I have to.
Now, do you plan out chapters or story beats? Because I've heard a lot of people say both, so I'm curious.
I don't know if this is a weird style. It might be a weird style of writing, but I came out of screenwriting. So I write scene to scene.
Okay.
And I write relatively short chapters too. So each chapter is essentially a movie scene in a way. Some people have told me they really like it because they can just ping through like these brief little chapters, but it helps me finish things because that's the hardest part about writing is finishing, right? Is actually like staying focused and getting the words on the page. So I actually every chapter is a scene. So I write chapter to chapter, knowing this is what I need to accomplish in this brief segment of the book, and where I need to go from there. So yeah, it's I'm very reliant on chapters, and I'm also one of those nerds who loves to write chapter titles. I absolutely it's some people think they're absolutely abhorrent and we shouldn't and they take up too much space on the page, and I love chapter headers, so it's each little scene.
I love chapter titles. I just can't name them for the life of me. But
My trick, and feel free to steal it, is I find my favorite line of dialogue from each chapter,
mhm.
and I'll tease something out, like whatever I think the best little one liner is, and I'll take just a couple of words from that and make that, because that actually helps me focus the writing of the chapter too, is this one thing that I know somebody has to say. Um, and I'll tease out this one little pivotal line, and I'll make part of that the chapter header, almost like a sneak preview of what you're going to get from each section of the book.
That's really interesting. Now, do you have any other pieces of writing advice that you want to share?
Um, so my favorite piece of writing advice, I got it from my first newspaper editor when I was panicking trying to get a story done, and he was the kindest newspaper editor you could possibly have, and he just yells over his shoulder. He goes, "Done is good." And he says, "Good next time can be better, but if you can get something done," like he's like, because we were always on a deadline. If you didn't have a story by the time the newspaper went to press, you didn't have a newspaper.
Mm.
And he just, "Done is good." He'd yell over his shoulder. And so my thought is like, and especially knowing how hard it is to finish something as a writer, if you can finish a manuscript, even if it's not perfect, you're still ahead of the game. You're still ahead of a lot of other people that aspire to be writers. If you can just get the words on the page, and you can always get better the next time around. So my biggest advice is, don't worry about being perfect. Just throw it out there. You can always go back and fix it later. You can always have your beta readers tell you that something doesn't make sense, but if you can just get a scene done and get a chapter done and get an arc done, done is good, and then you can get it better from there instead of getting sort of worried about, because it's very easy to get very anxious about every word you put on the page. And that was I heard that it was 20 years ago somebody said that to me, and I quote it almost every day.
That's fantastic
Done is
advice.
good.
I would also add to it that a lot of times when you're writing, things turn out better than they feel in the moment.
I've found every book has a chapter I don't want to write, and I
Mhm.
get so grumpy. I don't, why do I need this scene? Can I just leave it out? I'm going to skip it. And I've never been able to remember which one that is. When I go back and reread the manuscript later on, I can't find the chapter I hated.
Oh, really?
And I think what it is we as writers, our brains kind of smooth out the arc a little bit. Like, it even our writing style will kind of even things out, because there's going to be peaks and valleys in every story you tell.
Mhm.
So it, even if it's a down chapter, it's not going to be so not you that it won't feel like you anymore. Like it'll just be a slightly, it might feel like intentional. It might feel like, oh, this is the chapter that's a little low key, or this is a chapter that's intentionally a little messy or a little trippy. So I've always found, and I just power through it. Although my one trick, actually, if you let me throw out one more trick, is
Oh, of course.
I do third person limited, so each chapter kind of has a perspective character, but it's not first person. And what I've found is if I'm really, really stuck, I'll go, okay, maybe this isn't Billy's chapter, maybe this is Emily's chapter. And I just change the camera focus and I put it on a different character, same scene, different character. And sometimes it's just like, oh, I was looking at it from the wrong side of the room. I had to put it into a different character's eyes. And the number of times that saved me from myself where I just couldn't figure out like what's Jane thinking about in this scene, blah blah blah. I'm like, well, maybe Jane isn't the one we should be listening to right now. Maybe we should be hearing Kate's perspective. And that changing the camera focus. I don't know if it changes the gears in my brain or what, but sometimes that just kind of gets me past a hump where if I have a scene that I'm stuck on that I can't get through.
I love that. I think that's great advice. So earlier you mentioned that you've been writing your entire career.
Mhm.
What, like, when did you start? How did you start writing?
Oh God, I can't. I was writing as a little kid, like with crayons. So I don't ever remember not being a storyteller. I just kept changing what type of stories I was telling. Um, like I was writing stories about my dinosaurs. One of my favorite stories. I was in those I forget the name of it. It was like one of those creative programs that they put kids in that are a little bit wonky. That they need a little bit more creativity, so they send them out of the classroom for the day. And the project was make an undersea city out of like junk, out of like
Mhm.
leftover stuff. And I was just telling the story over Thanksgiving where the instructor walks up to me. I'm off by myself. I'm not helping the other kids do it at all. And I'm clearly like arranging people in the undersea city that we were building out of like styrofoam and cardboard. And she looks at me and she goes, "You would do this by yourself at home, wouldn't you?" And I'm like, "Yep." She's like, "Okay, we got a storyteller." Um,
Love
and
that.
so, and from there, it was just, I wanted to be a comic book writer. I actually wrote books in college that are a mess. And I'm glad I can't find the manuscripts because when you're first learning, sometimes it's better to not see your own mistakes. Um, Became a newspaper writer, I directed a film that I wrote. So I tried every different medium and just books ended up becoming the thing because there was the most kind of control over it.
Mhm.
Because you're the only creative during the initial creation process, you're kind of alone in the room. But I don't even I wish I knew where I got the start. I think I was just a really shy kid who couldn't get out of my own head. And so I just had a lot of stories to tell that weren't about me, you
Mhm.
know.
Okay, wait. So you talking about these books in college that you ended up like not being able to look back at or whatever?
Mm.
That leads me to another question, which is what is a time that you've had to kill your darlings, so to speak? Would you consider that one of those?
Those were, I think, the ones that I wrote when I was first starting out. I think I got luck because I wrote them and I did the whole. It's so funny now compared to when I was first starting out, where it was like you had to physically mail a paper copy to someone to even hope they might look at it. And I think the killing the darlings there was when you're first starting out. There's this tendency to imitate the people you really admire, and you can be a little bit. It takes time to learn to not be quite so inspired by other to find your own voice. So I almost got lucky. I was too imitative. I was too inspired by the people that I was reading at the time. So it's a good practice to learn story structure, and then the mimicry kind of fades away as you find your own voice the longer you do it. Um, killing darlings with some of the new stuff. There are times where I'll just find out if something is stressing me out as I'm writing a story now. Um, if there's a component that I'm like, this is really like this is making the joy of writing go away. Um, I will never I should it's this is not a serious writing piece of advice, but kind of funny.
Mhm.
The spin-off series to the Indestructibles, Echo in the Sea, it's this magic on the high seas kind of adventures, Aquaman, Wonder Woman style superhero more than
Oh, cool.
Batman kind
Yeah.
of thing. And I'm like, they're gonna have a sea lion sidekick. This is going to be awesome. And I got 3 pages into it. And I'm like, writing a nonverbal sea lion is going to make me crazy for 350 pages. I'm not going to do it. And I have a stuffed sea lion that I'd like to inspire me. I put it on my desk, like this little, like from the local aquarium. And I'm like, nope, you're not going into the book. You're done. And that happens at least once a book where I've got this idea where I really want something to be a part of the story. And I'm like, if you can I'm very lean with my writing, so I'm very not precious. Actually, newspapers help with that. Like
Mhm.
I have. I always joke around like being edited. Some writers can push back a lot with editing. I'm like, there's very few things that I'll push back on if I'm working with an editor on something. Um, so a lot of my killing my darlings comes from myself, like to how do I make sure I don't stress myself out writing? Because if somebody's like, you know, this quirk that you've given this character is really awful, like in terms of like a verbal kind of cue or something like that. I'm like, you know what, you're probably right. No, I'm gonna push over when it comes to changing things that way, because in newspapers you're hacking stuff apart to get it out the door anyway. So I'm kind of very easy. I hope I'm an easy edit because I don't argue a lot with changes. But killing my darling, sometimes it's just like I have this idea that I absolutely love, and I'm like, and this is going to drive me crazy and it's going to stress me out. And the editor's probably not going to like it anyway. So I should
Mhm.
probably just pull it out and get rid of it.
Oh, I think every writer can totally relate to that moment where you're creating something, adding it in, and like, this is so precious. I'm gonna have this in it forever, and it drives you crazy. I had that. I wrote a centaur as one of my characters, and they were supposed to be a background character, and they became a main character, and they couldn't fit into any room or sit down. That so it had to be scrapped. But I was so excited when
Oh,
as I was first writing it with the idea.
I could actually, God, I was just actually talking with someone because I play D&D and we were joking around about centaurs. I'm like, horses can't walk upstairs, can they? And that became a whole conversation among adults in a room. Like, can horses I don't think so. That does that mean that he can't walk up a flight of stairs? And we had like this whole conversation about it. And like that would just become logistics in a book. Actually, logistics when you're writing a book are a nightmare because it's hard
Mm-hmm.
enough to keep track of what you're actually trying to keep track of. So anything that you can do to kind of ease your brain a little bit, it goes a long way for keeping your sanity, you know.
What are some ways or some things that you do to manage logistics in your writing?
I wish I kept better notes, but my logistics, my scratch board, is my favorite tip. I don't know if it would work for everybody, but instead of having an outline, I do each scene on something that I can move around. I know some people that use index cards instead, but I just love the sticky notes because I can put it up on a wall. I look like Charlie Day with the conspiracy
Pepe
theory.
Sylvia.
Yeah, yeah, that's how my wall looks when I'm writing the book. But it's mobile, so I can move things around and not lose them. And I get and you know you can put something in the bullpen, like, okay, that's an idea that I need to keep for later. Let me stick that on the wall over here, and I can see if I can't sneak it in later on. Um, and sometimes just knowing that the hardest thing is admitting that you don't need something.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I love this idea, this one scene, and then you get there and it's like, this doesn't need to actually happen. The book is better without it. And because I using that sort of mobile shifting, like physically moving the pieces of the book around when you're building it, um, you don't have to throw it away. You can put it off to the side, but you can also just kind of remove it and see how the flow is without it. And that's worked out really well for me. And I didn't even do it on purpose. I just got really frustrated one day. It wasn't like I learned it in a class. I'm like, I'm confusing myself. I need to do this. So I just wrote everything out on a sticky note and put on a it was actually just a piece of cardboard. It was like a folded up US post office box that hadn't been opened up and like expanded into a box shape.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's still next to my desk. It's the same US post office box that never got mailed, that I just stick all my notes onto. But it's that just that giving yourself the freedom to pull something out. Because sometimes, almost always, less is more. And you know that you're going to go through 17 drafts before it goes anywhere anyway, so you can always put it back in, if you need to. But don't be afraid to cut. You'll be amazed at how long the story turns out without it, even if you do start cutting.
Absolutely. So you were saying that your writing, like the stories that you've chosen to tell have changed over time, even though you've continued writing. But is there any through line? Do you feel like there's a certain type of character or theme or something that you're drawn towards?
I keep going back to Sad Magicians. Actually, it's so funny. There's so that the and it comes out of, I always joked around that I grew up with like John Constantine characters, or like the Harry Dresden type, kind of like the befuddled kind of almost anybody that's noir, but also magic kind of,
Mhm.
um, and that's not the central character in the Indestructibles. He's the mentor that pulls the kids together at the beginning. Is my sad boy magician, aging sad boy magician, and uh, I keep revisiting that. I ended up there's another sort of the draggled magician with a lot of regrets in the Echo and the Sea series. Very very different, much kind of sleazier. Doc Silence is the character in the Indestructibles that um has that sort of, and the thing that I love about it is he's the type of character who inhabits the type of stories that I love the most, because I love kind of winding Sandman-esque, like magic in our real world kind of vibes. Like that's one of my favorite types of stories and types of characters to read about. So he represents that little piece of genre that I want to exist in every story that I write. And when I didn't have him in the second series. I'm like, well, we're gonna put one in. He'll be younger, he'll be more arrogant, he'll be less pleasant, but he's going to be the same kind of vibe. And my most recent full length book was a prequel that was all, it's the life and times of Doc Silence. It's his origin story, but it's told as little vignettes through his whole life before he even becomes a hero. It's just
Oh,
this,
interesting.
and I always joke around. That's the book. That was my I can now get struck by lightning book. It
Mhm.
was, I think every author has one book. I'm like, I just need to get this one out of my brain. And and if wild bulls run me over in the street, I'll be like, at least I wrote that one book that I really needed to. And everything else from there on is bonus. So that's, I love, it's that person who knows just a little bit more than the average person, and not in a good way, but more like, I know enough that I need to look out for other people, and they may not know that I'm looking out for them. And that's my favorite kind of character, is the hero that nobody knows about, um, who has a lot of regrets and things that they leave behind to do that, to be that person. I forget who, I, some other writer that I can't remember the name of referred to it as the shaman on the hill. It's the guy who's
Mhm.
outside of the town looking down, and everybody thinks he's a little weird, and you don't actually know he's keeping the demons at bay, kind of a thing. Like the weirdo outside of town that nobody talks to is actually there for a reason. And I love that character of being sort of the sad but fascinating, and who can see through the veil, because the real world is so drab. So
Mhm.
the idea that there's a second layer, that some people can see and some people are kind of watching out for us, is uh truly so close to my heart. Like everybody's like, and your favorite character from Echo is Barnabas too, isn't it? You always like the sad magician. I'm like, yes, I always do.
You know what? Sad magicians are fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all of that. And you've been a fantastic guest. This was
Thanks so much.
awesome. I just have one last question, and
Sure.
that is, what do you have coming up?
I would be remiss if I don't mention that The Indestructibles is now out on audio for the first time
Mhm.
ever, with a full cast. So all of the different characters have a different actor playing them, which is amazing. And that's brand new. So I got to make sure I mention that the cast is amazing. I get to play one character very minor, but it's mostly
Oh,
much more
cool.
talented voice actors than me on there. And in the next year, I'm going to have a short story collection coming out that is going to feature stories about all the characters from all the spin-offs, and so some Indestructibles and some Echo stories, and it's going to be this sort of like conglomeration of all these short stories about the world that I've been building with all these different series. And the last thing I've got coming out is that I'm a little overdue with the third book in my third series, the Dungeon Crawlers. I'm slightly overdue. I should have had that out a little bit sooner, but we'll have the third book out very soon for that as well. So
That is also exciting. Everyone listening to this, please go buy all of these books and the audio book, and keep an eye out for anything new coming out as we go into the new year. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
Matt Phillion.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast, and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.